The rain poured in silver sheets across the sleepy town of Haleford, turning the cobbled streets into winding rivers. Inside the worn wooden doors of Maplewood Cafe, the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread hung thick in the air. A handful of patrons lingered over mugs of steaming coffee, their eyes occasionally drifting to the windows where the storm raged like a tantrum outside. The bell above the entrance chimed weakly as Daniel Reed stepped inside, soaked from the downpour. His dark trench coat dripped a trail of water behind him. In one hand, he clutched a small umbrella. In the other, the tiny fingers of his 6-year-old daughter Ella. The little girl said nothing, her bright eyes scanning the unfamiliar space with quiet unease. Daniel guided her gently to a corner booth, away from the kitchen clatter and murmured conversation. He helped Ella into the seat, then sat across from her. She began to rock slightly, her arms folded tightly across her chest, and her lips moving without sound. Daniel's expression softened with a familiar sadness. "We won't be long, baby girl," he whispered. Suddenly, a loud voice rang from behind the counter. "Hot cocoa coming up!" The cheerful announcement made Ella flinch. Her small body tensed, and she let out a soft whimper. The clanging of silverware in the kitchen only made things worse. Seconds later, Ella slipped out of the booth and collapsed to the floor, trembling and overwhelmed. She started tapping her hands against the tiles rhythmically, a sign Daniel knew too well. Her panic had begun. He moved to scoop her up, murmuring soft reassurances, but before he could reach her, someone knelt beside them. A young woman in a green apron with flour on her cheek. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her name tag read Mara. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, pulling a small laminated card from her pocket. It showed a cartoon heart and the word safe written in bold letters. Ella paused, her movements slowing as her eyes locked onto the image. Mara placed her hand on her chest and took a deep breath in, then out. Slow and exaggerated. She tapped the card again. Ella mirrored the breath, hesitant but curious. Daniel stared, stunned, as his daughter calmed down. Not completely, but enough to sit up. Mara offered her a soft foam star from her apron pocket, placing it in front of her without pressure. Ella reached for it cautiously, holding it close to her chest. Daniel's gratitude was sharp, but tangled with something else, discomfort. A stranger had reached his daughter in a way he hadn't. He cleared his throat. "Who are you to touch my daughter without asking?" he snapped, his voice a low growl. Mara's smile faded. She looked up slowly. "I didn't mean to overstep," she said, steady but sincere. "I just saw she needed someone to speak her language." Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes dark. "And you think you're qualified? You don't know us. You don't know her." Mara stood, still calm. "No," she said, "but I've been her. And I've loved someone like her." Then she turned, walked back to the counter, and left Daniel sitting there, furious, confused, and shaken. Daniel sat rigid in the booth long after Mara had walked away. The storm still beat against the windows, but he barely noticed. Across from him, Ella sat curled up, the soft foam star clutched tightly in her hands. Her eyes were red, but her breathing had steadied. The laminated card Mara had used now lay forgotten on the edge of the table, or so Daniel thought. As he leaned forward to check on his daughter, he caught her gaze drifting toward the counter where Mara was pouring coffee. Ella's fingers reached for the card with a hesitant motion, brushing the edge as if to test whether it was real. She didn't look at Daniel, she just held the card and stared. Daniel's pride ached. For years he had fought every battle alone. Therapy sessions, sleepless nights, tantrums that shattered every expectation of normalcy. He'd tried everything to connect with his daughter, and though he knew she loved him in her way, there was always a silence between them he couldn't seem to break. But now, one waitress with a flashcard had made a crack in the wall Ella had built in just 5 minutes. He hated how much that meant. Eventually he gathered Ella into his arms and whispered, "Let's go home, sweet pea." She didn't resist, just nodded faintly, still holding the foam star. As they passed the counter, Mara looked up again. Her expression was neutral, not smug or self-satisfied, just tired. She nodded politely, not expecting acknowledgement. Daniel said nothing. He pulled open the door, letting the wind and rain slap him in the face. Behind him, the bell above the door jingled once more as it closed on the quiet space. That night, Daniel barely slept. He sat by Ella's bed while she clutched the star to her chest, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. His thoughts churned in quiet torment. Not about Mara, not even about Ella's sudden calm, but about himself. Why hadn't he known to try something like that? Why did it feel like the most meaningful moment in his daughter's day had come from a stranger? The next morning brought weak sunlight and restless silence. Ella spent her time tracing circles on the window glass with her fingers. Her mouth moved wordlessly, as usual, but every so often she reached into her toy bin, pulled out a piece of paper, and began to draw. Daniel watched from the hallway, heart aching. When she finally left the paper unattended, curiosity got the better of him. He walked in and picked it up. A stick figure woman with a braid. A little girl holding a star. The word safe, written in uneven crayon. Though. His throat tightened. He didn't say a word, just folded the picture carefully and tucked it into his wallet. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew the truth. His daughter had spoken not with words, but through colors and drawings and breath, and she hadn't spoken to him. She had spoken to Mara, and somehow he knew this wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The following week passed in a blur of half-hearted routines and lingering unease. Daniel buried himself in work. Emails, video calls, meetings he barely listened to. Anything to distract from the image of Ella drawing that stick figure woman over and over. Anything to ignore the way she now looked toward the cafe window each time they passed Maplewood Street. But no matter how busy he stayed, that moment in the diner returned to him again and again. Ella's flinching silence. Passing safe. The card with the word safe. The way she had exhaled for that stranger, like someone who finally understood the rhythm of her world. Daniel hated it. Hated how powerless it made him feel. For 6 years he had carried this weight, parent, protector, interpreter of his daughter's silence. He'd read every book, met with every specialist, learned all the signs and therapies and strategies. And still, Ella had built her fortress, silent, impenetrable. Then a waitress with a tired braid and a flower-streaked apron walked in and, with one card, had done what he hadn't. She'd reached his daughter. Gently, effortlessly. It wasn't fair. Pauvst. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter, that Mara had just been lucky. Right place, right time. But something deeper gnawed at him. That Mara had seen Ella, really seen her, not as a problem or a burden, but as a person. On Friday evening, Daniel found himself parked near Maplewood Cafe. Not inside, just nearby, just watching. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened beneath the street lamps. He told himself he was here to grab coffee, but the engine stayed running, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Inside, he could see Mara clearing tables, her sleeves rolled up, her braids swinging as she moved between booths. She looked tired, but not defeated. She smiled when she handed a regular their change, even laughed at some joke he couldn't hear. She looked kind, real. The next morning, Ella was unusually restless. She paced from window to door to toy box, then back again. She didn't draw, didn't hum, just clutched the foam star Mara had given her like it was a lifeline. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. Bill, he knelt beside her. "Do you want to go back?" he asked gently. Bill. Ella didn't respond with words, but she didn't need to. She simply walked to the front door, shoes already in hand. At the cafe, the bell above the door jingled as they entered, and this time, it was Daniel who flinched. The place was quiet again, rain pattering on the windows, the hum of a coffee machine in the background. Mara looked up from the register and froze. Daniel stepped forward, holding Ella's hand. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Mara's lips parted, surprised. "Sure." They slid into the same booth as before. Ella climbed in willingly, clutching her foam star. Mara stood beside the table, arms folded, cautious. Daniel cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Mara raised an eyebrow. "For yelling at me? Or assuming I was overstepping by trying to help your daughter when she was clearly in distress?" Daniel swallowed. All of it. A long pause. Mara sighed. Look, I don't need thanks or apologies. I saw a kid who reminded me of myself. That's all. You? He said, surprised. Mara nodded. I didn't speak until I was almost 9. Grew up thinking I was broken. People talked around me, about me, but rarely to me. It was hell. So when I saw her, I just thought maybe I could make it a little less lonely for her. That's all. Daniel stared at her, the pieces shifting in his mind. Not pity, not savior complex. Empathy. Real, lived empathy. I didn't know, he murmured. No, Mara replied. You didn't care to ask. That one stung more than he expected. But before he could respond, Ella tugged at Mara's apron. Both adults looked down. Ella held up the card, the one with the cartoon heart, and the word safe. Then, with deliberate slowness, she tapped it twice, then pointed at Mara. Mara blinked. Is that for me? She asked softly. Ella nodded. Tears prickled at Daniel's eyes. Mara crouched down beside the booth and smiled. Thank you, sweet girl. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He didn't know what this was yet, or what it meant, but it was the first time in a long time he felt like something was beginning rather than falling apart. The cafe was quieter than usual that afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving behind gray skies and puddles, reflecting the swaying branches of sleepy trees. Inside Maplewood Cafe, the soft clink of cutlery and the hum of a distant radio filled the gaps between conversations. But at Daniel and Ella's booth, there was only quiet. The kind of quiet that carried weight. Mara had returned to her shift, though her eyes often flicked toward their table. Daniel sat with a coffee he barely touched, elbows on the table, watching his daughter with a conflicted expression. Ella was unusually focused. She'd pulled a paper napkin toward her, smoothing it carefully before reaching for a crayon from her pocket, one of the few things she always carried. Her movements were small, precise, almost reverent. Daniel watched, not wanting to interrupt, not wanting to scare off whatever spark had been lit inside her. Line by line, color by color, a picture emerged. A little girl with a round face holding a star. Beside her, a taller figure with a long braid and a soft smile. Above their heads, one word written in blocky, uncertain letters. Safe. Daniel swallowed hard. Ella didn't show him the drawing. She just stared at it, her small fingers tracing the edges like she was trying to keep it from disappearing. That night, at home, the house was dim except for the soft glow of a nightlight in Ella's room. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching as she fell asleep with the napkin still clutched to her chest. Her lips moved silently. Maybe words, maybe just thoughts. Daniel closed the door gently. Downstairs, he sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his hands over his face. His phone buzzed. A message from his sister Claire. Any updates on the little one? You doing okay? He didn't reply right away. What would he even say? That a waitress had calmed his daughter? That the first time Ella had smiled in weeks wasn't because of him? That he wasn't sure if he felt grateful or like a failure? He set the phone aside and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Ella had drawn Mara. Ella had spoken, not out loud, but in a language Daniel could finally understand. And still, some small part of him hated that it hadn't been because of him. The next morning, when Daniel dropped Ella off at school, she paused at the classroom door. Her tiny hand reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the napkin again. She looked at it, hugged it to her chest, and walked inside. Daniel stood at the door for a long moment after she disappeared from view. He knew what he had to do, but he wasn't sure he was ready. Because forgiveness required humility. Back dissy, and asking for help? That was something he had never been good at. Daniel spent the rest of the day pacing the length of his home like a man who had misplaced something vital and couldn't admit he had lost it. Every time he passed Ella's room, he glanced at the quiet bed, the scattered crayons, the books she rarely touched. The house, though clean and orderly, felt sterile. Empty, as if all the noise had gone somewhere else and taken warmth with it. He stood at the kitchen counter, staring at a cold cup of coffee. His phone lay beside it, screen dark, waiting. His fingers hovered over it, hesitating. He didn't know what he would say if he called Mara. He didn't even know if she would answer. But Ella was different now. Since that day at the cafe, she had drawn more, looked people in the eye a little longer, held the styrofoam like a charm. There was a thread of connection, delicate but real, that seemed to lead straight back to Mara, and Daniel couldn't ignore the way his daughter had changed. Not because of a new therapy, Shaj, not because of him, Shaj, because someone had looked at her and seen her, and hadn't looked away. That night, Daniel sat on the couch with a notepad and stared at the blank page. Finally, he scribbled down a message, then rewrote it, then deleted it completely. Eventually, he typed a text and pressed send before he could talk himself out of it. Hey, this is Daniel, Ella's father. I don't want to bother you, but would you maybe consider coming by for an hour? No pressure, no expectations. Just, Ella misses you. I think she needs to see you, and I think I need to say thank you. He stared at the screen for what felt like hours. No reply. He tossed the phone on the couch and stood to clear his head. But just as he reached the kitchen, it buzzed. Mara, I have a double shift tomorrow, but I can come by Sunday afternoon. I'll bring the cards. A slow breath escaped him. His grip on the counter loosened. He didn't know what would happen. He wasn't even sure if he was doing this for Ella or to make peace with himself. But either way, a decision had been made. Sunday afternoon arrived, cloaked in a stillness that seemed to settle over everything. The wind had gone quiet. The skies, pale and overcast, hung low over the sleepy neighborhood. Inside the house, Daniel paced the living room, one eye on the clock, the other on the driveway. Ella sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging her foam stars and laminated cards into neat rows. Every now and then she looked up at the front door, expectant, alert, she knew. Daniel adjusted the pillows on the couch, then undid it, checked the window, then backed away, not wanting to seem eager. But his chest was tight with a strange blend of nerves and hope, an unfamiliar cocktail for a man who had learned to live with low expectations. At exactly 1:05 p.m., a small silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Ella shot up before Daniel could react. She ran to the door and pressed her hands to the glass, her breath fogging up the pane. Daniel followed, slower, quieter, grounding himself in the moment. Mara stepped out of her car, wearing a faded denim jacket and dark jeans, her hair pulled into that same easy braid. Slung over one shoulder was a canvas tote bag, frayed at the edges and bulging with flashcards and who knew what else. She looked like she didn't belong in Daniel's neat, carefully arranged life, and yet something about her felt necessary. He opened the door before she could knock. "Hey," she said, a little breathless. "Hope I'm not late." "No," Daniel replied, stepping aside. "You're right on time." Ella didn't hesitate. She ran to Mara and held up a card, one of her own. It was a drawing she'd made that morning, 2 stick figures holding a star between them. Mara knelt, her voice catching. "Is this us?" she asked softly. Ella nodded, pressing the card into her hands. Daniel stood back, unsure of where he belonged in this moment. It was like watching 2 parts of a puzzle gently slide together. "Where would you like to work?" Mara asked, glancing up. "The living room is fine," Daniel said, clearing his throat. "You can sit anywhere." Mara settled onto the rug next to Ella, unpacking a small whiteboard, a stack of picture cards, and several markers. She laid them out with careful deliberation, inviting Ella to join her at each step. The little girl responded immediately, curiosity glowing behind her usual stillness. They began with simple signs, friend, home, safe, and paired them with drawings and sounds. Mara didn't rush. She never repeated commands. She waited, encouraged, smiled. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, his heart somewhere between awe and disbelief. Ella wasn't just mimicking motions. She was responding, signing back, even trying to say the words aloud, her face tight with effort. At one point, Mara drew a house and signed home. Ella tapped the whiteboard twice, then looked up and signed it back, her expression glowing. Daniel felt his eyes sting, but it was what happened next that undid him. Ella stood, clutching the whiteboard. She crossed the room with determination and tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Wilm." He knelt instinctively. "Munna." She held up the board. 3 shaky, unmistakable words were written in uneven letters. "I like Dad." Daniel's breath hitched. He stared at the board, then at his daughter's radiant face. His voice was a whisper. You did this?" Ella nodded, her lips curling into a shy smile. Behind her, Mara blinked back tears. Daniel wrapped his arms around Ella, pulling her into his chest. His voice cracked as he mouthed a silent, "Thank you," to Mara. And Mara, this stranger who had walked into their lives by accident, simply nodded, quiet, present, real. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't carrying everything alone. For the first time in Ella's life, her voice, however quiet, was being heard, and it changed everything. The hours passed gently, like sunlight slowly warming a cold room. Mara remained on the living room floor beside Ella, now guiding her through a simple matching activity with signs and flashcards. There was no pressure in her tone, no urgency, just patience, repetition, smiles, and Ella responded as if she'd known Mara forever. She traced letters with her fingers, mimicked soft sounds with brave attempts, signed words like friend, happy dad. Each time she got one right, Mara clapped softly and beamed, and Ella beamed right back. Daniel, standing in the hallway, barely dared to breathe. He had spent 6 years learning how to listen to silence, but now his daughter was speaking in signs, in glances, in fragile syllables that cracked but held. And it wasn't just the speech, it was the joy. Ella laughed. She laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that burst from her chest, like it had been trapped in a cage far too long. It echoed through the house, like a song Daniel didn't realize he had missed. For Mara, it was impossible not to be moved. This little girl she had known only in glances and flashcards had become the center of the room, full of effort and light. But Mara didn't cry. Not now. She knew this wasn't her moment to fall apart. But Daniel did. Quietly. He stepped into the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and let himself exhale for the first time in years. His daughter was coming alive in front of him, and it wasn't because of some expensive program or long-shot medical trial. It was because a woman with a tote bag full of laminated cards had taken the time to sit on a rug and wait. He returned just in time to see Ella tap her whiteboard again, this time pointing to the word home, then to Daniel, then to Mara. Mara tilted her head. "Is this your home?" she asked softly. Ella nodded. Then, after a long pause, she pointed again at Mara and added a small hand sign Daniel didn't recognize. Mara gasped. Daniel looked confused. What was that? "That's welcome," Mara said, voice shaking. "She just said I belong here." Daniel's heart clenched. He lowered himself onto the floor, beside both of them, unsure where he fit but wanting to try. Ella reached out and took both their hands. A triangle of warmth. Connection. Trust. In that moment, Daniel realized the wall between him and his daughter hadn't come down because someone knocked it over. It had come down because someone had shown them the door and waited with open arms on the other side. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. The next few weeks unfolded like a fragile miracle. Every Sunday afternoon, Mara returned, her tote bag in one hand, that easy, grounding smile in the other. Each visit brought more color to Ella's world. More words. More connection. More laughter that bounced off the walls like the home had been holding its breath for years. Daniel couldn't help but watch in awe. Ella was blooming. She signed phrases now. "Thank you. I want juice. Read again." She even whispered sounds, small at first but growing in clarity. She didn't cling to her styrofoam as much. She clung to Mara. Daniel couldn't lie to himself anymore. It wasn't just Ella who looked forward to those Sundays. His heart did too. And slowly, without him noticing when it began, Mara's presence slipped into his world like a quiet song on repeat. She stayed a little longer each visit. Sometimes she brought homemade bread. Sometimes she helped clean up the paints when Ella made a mess. Sometimes she stayed for dinner. Daniel found himself smiling more, breathing easier, sleeping better. But not everyone saw it that way. "Be careful," his sister Claire warned one rainy Tuesday as she folded laundry at his kitchen table. "You don't know this woman. You've let her in fast." Daniel frowned. "She's been good for Ella. Or she sees a lonely man with money and a vulnerable daughter. That happens, Daniel." He rolled his eyes. "It's not like that." Claire looked at him sharply. "Are you sure?" Daniel didn't answer. But that night, when Ella handed him another drawing, this time with 3 figures, all holding hands under a sun with family scribbled above, he tucked it into a drawer with a lump in his throat. And yet, seeds of doubt had been planted. A week later, an email arrived from Claire with a single subject line. "Thought you should know." Attached was an audio recording, muffled but audible. Mara's voice. "He's definitely well off," she said. "If I play this right, I may not have to worry about bills again." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Audible. He sat at his desk in the dark, the recording playing twice, 3 times. Audible. 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 Was it taken out of context? Audible. Football senol. He didn't know. All he knew was that trust, so carefully rebuilt, began to crumble. The next Sunday, when Mara arrived at the house, Ella ran to the door. But Daniel didn't smile. He stood behind his daughter, rigid, arms crossed. "We need to talk," he said flatly. Mara blinked. "Okay, sure." They sat at the kitchen table. Daniel pulled out his phone and tapped the recording. Her voice filled the room. Mara's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. Just tell me, was any of this real? Or were you just playing a role?" Ella stood frozen between them, sensing something was wrong, her hands trembling at her sides. "I didn't." "Daniel, I swear to you, it's not what you think," Mara stammered, eyes wide with disbelief. "I would never use Ella like that. Or you." "I think you should go," he said coldly. Mara turned to Ella, kneeling. Her voice broke. "You are so brave, sweetheart. Don't forget that." She kissed Ella's forehead and stood, tears sliding freely down her face. "I thought you were different," she told Daniel quietly. "But you're just another man who listens to fear louder than truth." Then she was gone. And in the silence that followed, Ella whimpered and reached for the door. Daniel scooped her up, but she squirmed out of his arms and ran to the window. She pressed her face against the glass, searching for Mara's car. But it was already gone. The house had never felt colder, and Daniel had never felt so completely alone. The days that followed unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Quiet, relentless, and impossible to stop. Ella stopped signing. She stopped drawing. She barely made eye contact. The flashcards that once brought her joy sat untouched in the corner of her room. The little foam star, once her treasure, lay beneath her pillow, ignored. She no longer looked toward the window at sunset, no longer waited by the door on Sundays. She simply existed. Silent, withdrawn. Like someone had turned off the lights inside her, and she hadn't bothered to turn them back on. Daniel tried everything. He read her favorite books, brought home her favorite cookies, set up her art supplies on the kitchen table. He even played her favorite animated movie on loop. But nothing worked. Ella's smile, the one Mara had coaxed out week by week, was gone. Daniel had thought losing Mara would hurt him. He hadn't realized how deeply it would hurt Ella. And the guilt? It came in waves. It followed him from room to room, whispering that he had made the worst kind of mistake, not the kind that bruised pride, but the kind that bruised a child. One rainy afternoon, Daniel walked past Ella's room and saw her curled on the rug, her back to the door. He stepped in slowly, unsure. Fork-tonshulul. She was holding something. Fork-tonshulul, 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 fork-tonul, fork-tonshulul, fork-tonshulul, fork-tonshulul. The one she had drawn for Mara weeks ago, creased and faded. but still intact. Her little finger traced over the crayon outlines, like she was trying to bring them back to life. Daniel's heart broke all over again. He knelt beside her, his voice low. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry." Ella didn't look up. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting you, but I only pushed someone away who cared." His hands trembled as he placed a gentle touch on her back. "You miss her, don't you?" This time she nodded. "Barely." But it was enough. Daniel sat there with her for a long time, in the silence they both understood too well. Not the peaceful kind. The aching kind. That night, after Ella had fallen asleep, Daniel found himself back at his desk, the weight of his choices pressing down like a storm cloud. He opened the email Claire had sent, stared at the subject line again, "Thought you should know," then his eyes drifted down to the small line beneath it. A second file, one he hadn't noticed before. Full recording. His heart froze. He clicked it. Mara's voice returned, but this time it was different, clearer, whole. "He's definitely well off," she said, with a sigh in her voice. "If I play this right." There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. "Maybe I won't have to worry about bills ever again, not because of him. Because if Ella keeps smiling like that, I'll finally feel like I'm doing something right." Daniel sat still, his breath caught. The rest of the conversation played on. "He's complicated," Mara admitted to someone off-screen. "But the way he looks at that little girl, he'd burn the world down for her." Her voice softened. "I'm not here for money. I'm here for her. That girl deserves a voice. I don't care if I never get paid. I just want to help her find it." Daniel's hands were shaking. He'd misjudged her. He hadn't just pushed away the one person who connected with his daughter. This to Munham Liles, he had betrayed her. And worse, he had broken the one thing Ella was finally starting to believe in: trust. He stood, pacing the room like a man on fire. He had to fix this. Somehow, he didn't know where Mara had gone. Didn't even know if she'd speak to him again. But he would search. He would beg. He would do whatever it took. Hasamix Essensef. Because this wasn't about pride. Mahobut Samangawen. This was about love. Mahobut Saman. This was about his daughter. Kamen Mahobut Samangawen. Rain misted softly against the windows the next morning, as if the world itself had taken on Daniel's grief. The house was quiet, too quiet. Ella sat curled beneath a blanket on the couch, her eyes unfocused, cradling the faded napkin, drawing in both hands like a keepsake from a dream she couldn't return to. Daniel stood at the doorway, heart heavy, guilt sitting on his shoulders like an iron yoke. He'd failed her, not in the way that came from forgetting a lunchbox or saying the wrong word, but in the way that cut deepest. He had taken away someone who had made her feel seen. He couldn't undo that. Not with toys, or apologies, or more silence. But maybe he could try to make it right. With a deep breath, he sat at his desk and opened a new email. Subject line: "I need to talk to you. Please." He stared at the screen, but something in him knew an email wasn't enough. Not for this. He opened his contacts. Scrolled. Nothing. No last name. No address. Just one message thread, with a phone number labeled simply Mara. He dialed. The line rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Instead, he searched. D. All day, Daniel scoured every lead he could think of. He called the Maplewood Cafe. Mara had quit 2 weeks ago. D. Left without notice, the manager said gruffly. Said she had to go take care of something out of town. Didn't say what. Daniel hung up, feeling the panic grow in his chest like a wildfire. By evening, he had tracked down a co-worker from the cafe, a woman named Ginny who agreed to speak to him briefly over the phone. She was staying at the Blue Cedar Motel before she found a room to rent, Ginny said. Last I heard, she was working at a bakery in a town off Route 11. Maggie's Pies, I think. Daniel didn't hesitate. He packed a small bag, filled Ella's backpack with her favorite things, and gently lifted her into the car. "We're going on a little trip," he whispered, "to find someone very important." She didn't respond, but she clutched her napkin tighter. The drive stretched long and gray, through winding back roads and small towns Daniel had never seen before. Every sign, every diner, every intersection brought fresh hope and fresh dread. He kept glancing at Ella in the rearview mirror, her gaze distant but searching. And then, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, they saw it. A faded sign on a cozy building with steaming windows. Maggie's Pies. Daniel parked quickly. His heart thundered. "Ready?" he asked softly. Ella didn't speak, but she nodded. They entered together. A bell jingled softly overhead. The scent of cinnamon, sugar, and warm crust wrapped around them like a blanket. Behind the counter, a woman with white hair and flour on her apron looked up. But Daniel didn't notice her. He saw her, Mara, standing by the oven, face pale, eyes wide. A tray slipped from her fingers and clattered against the counter. Before Daniel could speak, Ella was already running. Her arms opened wide. Her voice rang out, cracked, raw, but unmistakable. "Home." The bakery went silent. Mara dropped to her knees. Tears flooded her eyes, and Ella threw herself into her arms. Mara clung to her like a lifeline, whispering her name, stroking her hair. Daniel stood frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. The sound of his daughter's voice, the look on Mara's face, the weight of what he almost lost. Mara looked up at him, eyes still wet. They didn't need words, but Daniel gave them anyway. "I'm sorry," he choked, "for everything." Mara nodded slowly, holding Ella close. The truth had finally spoken. Not through explanations, not through arguments, but through the quiet miracle of a little girl who had found her words and used them to bring her world back together. The storm inside Daniel didn't pass the moment he saw Ella in Mara's arms. If anything, it roared louder, for everything unsaid, everything he'd broken. But as he stood there, watching his daughter bury her face into Mara's sweater, something inside him began to stitch back together. Pastry, Ella, chocolate, pastry. This was what Ella had been waiting for. Not another toy, not another quiet dinner. She had been waiting to go home, to a place made of people, not walls. Mara slowly stood, still holding Ella close. Her cheeks were stained with tears, her voice hoarse, but her eyes met Daniel's steadily. "I wasn't sure you'd ever come," she whispered. Daniel took a cautious step forward. "I didn't know where you went. I looked everywhere. I didn't know if you'd want to see me." Mara let out a breath that sounded like a lifetime. "I didn't think you would want to see me." Daniel shook his head. "That recording, it was a setup. A cruel one. I listened to the rest of it. I know the truth now." She blinked, startled. "I heard what you really said," he continued. "That you didn't care about money. That you just wanted to help Ella smile." Mara pressed her lips together, emotion flooding her face. But she didn't interrupt. "I didn't trust you," Daniel said quietly. "And because of that, I hurt you. I hurt her. I let fear speak louder than everything she was trying to tell me." Mara lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked down at Ella, who was still clinging to her side. "I wasn't sure I made a difference," she murmured. "But she knew." Daniel's voice cracked. "She hasn't smiled since you left. She stopped signing. Stopped everything." "I felt the same," Mara said gently. "Like I lost a part of myself." They stood there for a long moment, the scent of sugar and pie filling the space around them. Then Daniel dropped to his knees beside them. He reached out slowly until his hand rested lightly on Ella's shoulder. "I'm going to do better," he said, not to Mara, but to his daughter. "I promise." Ella looked up at him. Her small hand let go of Mara's sweater and reached for his. She placed it on top of his with quiet finality. Daniel's throat tightened. Mara smiled, the kind of smile you only give when something you thought was lost forever finds its way back. "Come home," Daniel whispered. "Both of you." Mara didn't answer right away. But when she nodded, it wasn't hesitant. It was homecoming. The drive home was wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't hurt. Ella sat in the back seat, her little hands curled around her napkin drawing. But this time, her eyes were bright. Awake. She hummed softly under her breath, a sound Daniel hadn't heard in weeks. And every few seconds, she peeked toward the front where Mara sat beside him, as if to confirm this wasn't a dream. Mara didn't speak much on the way back. She looked out the window, her fingers laced together in her lap. But Daniel could feel the unspoken truth radiating between them. This wasn't just about Ella anymore. This was about all of them. When they pulled into the driveway, Ella was the first one out of the car. She ran up the porch steps and waited at the door with both hands flat against it, rocking with excitement. Daniel opened the door, but before he could even step through, Ella darted inside and disappeared down the hallway. "Stay in the." He turned to Mara. "You don't have to stay long," he said quietly. "I know this is a lot." Mara looked at him, the corners of her mouth lifting. "I didn't come all this way for a 5-minute visit," Daniel chuckled, relieved, grateful, almost disbelieving. Inside, the house felt warmer. Somehow, as if it had exhaled too. Mara followed him into the living room, where the rug was still scattered with Ella's unused flashcards and art supplies from weeks ago. It was messy, imperfect, and it felt like home. "Look," came a small voice from the hallway. They both turned. Ella was standing there with the whiteboard in her hands, the same one she hadn't touched in days. She held it up proudly. 3 uneven words written in bright green marker. "I love home." Daniel's breath hitched. Mara knelt down. "You made that?" she asked gently. Ella nodded. Then, after a short pause, she added something else. She ran to Mara and threw her arms around her. A full, fierce hug. No words, no signs, just warmth. Mara wrapped her arms around the little girl and closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Daniel watched, motionless, moved beyond anything he could say. After a moment, Ella turned to him, opened her arms again, and whispered, clear as day, "Daddy." It wasn't the first time she'd said it, but it was the first time she said it because she wanted to. Daniel dropped to his knees and pulled her close. His arms wrapped around both her and Mara as if the 3 of them had always been meant to find each other this way, in the middle of broken things slowly healing. They stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of them held together by a single truth. This was no longer a family built from survival. It was a family built from choice. One word, one hug, one home. Life didn't return to the way it was. It became something better. The following weeks passed like pages in a storybook someone forgot to finish. Quiet moments stitched together by laughter, awkward grace, and slow healing. Mara returned every Sunday, and then on Tuesdays, and then most days, until it became clear she wasn't visiting anymore, she belonged. Ella lit up each time Mara entered a room. She showed her new drawings, new signs, even new sounds. Her world had gone from grayscale to full color, and Mara was part of every shade. Daniel watched it all with awe and a quiet ache in his chest. Not a painful ache anymore, but one filled with the overwhelming realization that he didn't just need Mara for Ella's sake, lacked it. He needed her for his own. One afternoon, as spring painted the trees with fresh blossoms and the air tasted faintly of hope, Daniel took a quiet drive with Ella. They stopped by Maggie's Pies, not for bread, but for memories. Mara was working behind the counter, her braid pulled loosely to the side, a dusting of flour on her cheek, humming as she filled a tray of cinnamon rolls. When she saw them walk in, her smile came easily, effortless, full of light. "Back for seconds?" she teased. "Actually," Daniel said, voice steady but thick with something deeper, "we're here for something sweeter." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Before she could ask more, Daniel took Ella's hand and knelt on the checkered tile floor, right in the middle of the cozy bakery. Mara froze. Ella reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small box Daniel had given her moments earlier. She handed it up to Mara with both hands. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a simple gold ring. Nothing flashy, nothing grand. But it shone. Just like them. Daniel looked up, heart hammering. "I don't have a speech," he said, "because I think everything I needed to say has already been written on napkins and whiteboards." Mara laughed, teary-eyed. "You changed our lives, Mara, not just Ella's. Mine too. You made this house a home. You made us believe in second chances." He took a breath. I want you to stay, not just in the house or the visits. I want you to stay in our lives. As family, as my family. He held her gaze. Will you marry me? Mara blinked. Once. Twice. Then pressed her flowery hands to her mouth. Ella bounced on her feet, her hands forming the word please in tiny loops. Mara let out a laugh that sounded like joy and tears tangled together. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Daniel rose, slid the ring onto her finger, and wrapped both Mara and Ella into a full-circle hug. The bakery clapped. Maggie wiped her eyes with her apron and muttered, About time. Flour floated in the air like snowfall, and the scent of sugar clung to the moment. It was messy, imperfect, and perfect. Spring unfurled like a soft ribbon across the countryside, carpeting the hills in wildflowers, painting the sky with pale blue, and ushering in the kind of days that felt written just for beginnings. At the edge of town, tucked behind a white farmhouse that had once felt too quiet, stood a sprawling oak tree, ancient, gnarled, and steady. Its branches stretched wide like open arms, casting dappled light across the field where rows of folding chairs had been set out, not in symmetry, but in gentle, loving disorder. Just like the people gathered there, not Misha's. Daniel stood at the base of the tree, nervous but steady. He wore a dark blue suit, clean but simple. No tuxedo, no polished fanfare. Just honesty. His hands fidgeted with the ring in his pocket, while his eyes scanned the crowd for her. Ella stood beside him, dressed in a white cotton dress with a pale yellow ribbon around her waist. She clutched a bouquet of paper flowers she'd made herself, each one painted with a crayon signature, a heart, a star, a stick figure of Mom, Dad, and me. Her face beamed with a joy so bright it felt sacred. And then she arrived. Mara, walking barefoot through the grass, her soft ivory dress flowing like a cloud behind her. A delicate crown of wildflowers rested on her head, and her braid had come undone slightly, strands of sunlight blonde hair dancing in the breeze. She looked like she'd stepped out of a child's drawing, radiant, real, and filled with something more than beauty, peace. She met Daniel's eyes and smiled, and everything else fell away. Maggie, apron and all, stood at the front as the day's impromptu officiant. All right, you two, she grinned, opening a worn leather notebook. Let's make this official before I start crying in front of a dozen bakery regulars. The ceremony was short, exactly as they wanted. No big speeches, no flower girls, just vows spoken like promises that had already been lived. I never thought love would come quietly, Daniel said, voice trembling. But then you came, gently, patiently, and taught me that love isn't loud. It's constant. Mara took his hand, her eyes shining. You didn't just let me in. You trusted me with your heart, and with hers. I'll never stop holding both with everything I am. When Maggie said, "You may kiss the bride," Daniel didn't hesitate. He pulled Mara close and kissed her with every ounce of love, apology, hope, and certainty that had brought them to this moment. The crowd cheered. Ella clapped wildly, and when the couple turned, she ran into their arms. They knelt together under the old oak tree, husband, wife, daughter, wrapped in a tangle of laughter, leaves, and second chances. The rest of the day unfolded with pie instead of cake, dancing in bare feet, and stories told on porch, swings under strings of warm fairy lights. There were no choreographed toasts, no grand exits. Just smiles, and hugs, and love written in small, unforgettable moments. And as the sun set behind them, casting golden light through the branches, Daniel looked at Mara and Ella and realized something simple. He didn't just build a home. He'd become one. Years didn't rush by. They settled, gently, like autumn leaves on a quiet farmyard. The little white house at the end of the gravel road grew into more than just a home. It became a sanctuary, a place where joy hummed in the walls and second chances were sewn into the floorboards. The oak tree behind the house, once the site of their simple wedding, now wore twinkle lights year-round. It had become the heart of their story, where Ella painted beneath its shade, where Mara read aloud from old books, where Daniel strung a hammock and found stillness. Ella blossomed. The girl who once curled inward had grown into someone who walked with color in her steps. She spoke more now, softly, thoughtfully, but her signing never left her. It became her poetry, her strength. She taught others at a small program Mara started in the renovated barn, a learning center for nonverbal and neurodivergent children, lovingly named Ella's Place. Parents drove from miles away to sit on rugs and watch their children light up under Mara's guidance. But few knew the full story, that it had started with a single laminated flashcard and a foam star, that it had been built from the silence of one little girl and the patience of a stranger who never gave up. Daniel changed too. He still kept lists, still checked locks twice, still folded Ella's clothes in perfect rows. But the tension in his jaw, the weight on his shoulders, it melted. Slowly. Because love like Mara's didn't fix broken things. It invited them to heal. He worked fewer hours, cooked more breakfasts, picked flowers with Ella on Wednesdays. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the wind pushed gently at the windows, he'd reach for Mara's hand and say, "I still don't know how I got this lucky." And Mara would only smile and say, "You didn't get lucky. You listened." They didn't chase grand adventures. They built 1,000 tiny ones. Picnics under the stars. Rainy day blanket forts, letters left in lunchboxes, painted stones hidden in the garden with secret messages only Ella could find. Each moment became a thread in the fabric of a life they never thought they'd have. Each day, they chose each other, quietly, fully, forever. And as the seasons shifted and Ella grew taller, her drawings changed too. No longer stick figures. Now, a family, arms interlocked beneath a big oak tree, always with the same word written in the corner in uneven but bold letters: home. It was a quiet summer night. Hakon Conjure. The kind of night that wrapped the world in velvet and whispered, "Remember this." Crickets sang softly in the tall grass. Fireflies blinked like shy stars beneath the trees. And on the creaky porch of their white farmhouse, 3 figures sat tangled together on a wooden swing. Ella lay curled between Mara and Daniel, her head resting on Mara's lap, a blanket draped over her legs. Her eyes, though heavy with sleep, remained fixed on the sky above, watching for something magic. "Will we see one?" she asked, her voice gentle and clear, a sound Daniel still never took for granted. Mara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "If we're patient." Daniel reached across Ella and took Mara's hand. Like everything else good in life, they sat in silence for a while, the kind that was warm and full, not empty. Then, without warning, a streak of light tore across the sky, a bright arc of silver and fire that painted the heavens for only a second. Ella gasped. "There," she whispered, pointing with one tiny hand. Mara's breath caught. Daniel leaned forward. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Ella, her eyes wide, looked to her parents and said softly, "Make a wish." Mara didn't answer right away. She turned her gaze back to the fading trail of the shooting star and shook her head slowly, her eyes shimmering. "No," she whispered, "not a wish." Daniel looked at her. "Then what?" "A promise." She looked down at Ella, then at Daniel. Her family, her miracle. "A promise that whatever comes, whatever storms, whatever changes, we hold on to this." "This," Daniel echoed, squeezing her hand. Ella looked at them both and signed the word family before whispering it out loud, her voice just barely carried by the breeze. "Our messy, beautiful, perfect family." They smiled, all 3, Emil. Above them, the stars wheeled on, Emils around them. The night embraced their little home like it was cradling something precious. And inside them, the promise glowed, brighter than any wish. The years rolled on, as they always do, not loudly, but with the soft persistence of wind-carving rivers, of laughter-etching lines beside your eyes. The white farmhouse aged with them. The paint chipped. The porch creaked louder in the winter. The oak tree grew wider, its roots deeper, but the laughter never faded from its halls, nor did the warmth that lived inside its rooms. Ella grew up under that roof, between bedtime stories and painted sunrises, between the rhythm of quiet mornings and the wild joy of muddy boots in spring. Her voice grew too. Not always loud, but always hers. Confident, clear, a harmony of spoken words and gentle hands. Ja. And Daniel? The man who once stood alone in the quiet, trying to reach his daughter through walls of silence, now woke every day to a home filled with movement, with purpose, with love. He never forgot the loneliness, but it had been replaced, line by line, layer by layer, with belonging. And Mara became the soul of that house. She taught, she laughed, she loved. She built a community in the barn, in the garden, in every child who walked through the gates of Ella's place and found someone who listened. She never stopped showing up, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. One fall evening, long after the wedding and the flashcards and the first quiet hug, the family sat on the porch swing again. The leaves burned orange and gold in the distance. A chill brushed the wind, but none of them moved. Ella, now older, her legs long, her shoulders stronger, leaned against her mother's side. "What do you think makes something a home?" she asked suddenly. Daniel looked at her, then at Mara. Mara smiled. "It's not the walls," she said, "not the roof, not the address. It's the people," Daniel added. "The promises, the forgiveness, the mornings you don't give up, and the nights you choose to stay." Ella nodded thoughtfully. Then she stood, walked across the porch, and pinned a new drawing to the wall just beside the door. It was simple. 3 figures, still hand in hand, still beneath the oak tree. But this time, above them, she had written, "Home is where they love you even when you break." Mara blinked back tears. Daniel reached for her hand, and Ella, brave, beautiful Ella, turned around and smiled the smile that had once changed everything. And in that quiet moment, with the swing creaking and the trees whispering and the sun setting behind their old white house, they knew home wasn't something you found. It was something you built, and they had built it together. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.